seminar. We have 2 more to go. I was just telling Suzanne Howlett, one of our members is interested in starting genealogies or family trees of houses. We have family trees of families, but houses also have genealogies and family trees. So if anyone is interested in working with Eric Anderson, please let me know, because I think it would be a fun project for the Historical Society. I'm going to call and lean on Rhonda McCollough, who's our recorder of deeds and a member. So if anyone's interested, let me know. Our program tonight is Patch McCollough and Laurence Bubeck, and I don't think I really need to say anything. I think it's pretty self-explanatory why they're here. So, Patch, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Skip. Laurence and I are both longtime members of the old Grove City Highland Band. We were both sergeants in our respective positions, which meant we were technical advisors as well as musicians. He was the pipe sergeant, I was the drum sergeant. Combined, we have about 40 years of experience in a band that went for half a century. And being 2 old sergeants reminds me of a recruiting song made famous by the Black Watch Regiment, the 42nd Regiment of Foot, which were stationed in the United States during the French and Indian War. And I think it goes something like, where 12 recruiting sergeants came from the Black Watch to markets and fair play, some recruits for to catch. But all what we listed was 40 and 12. So list one, laddie, and come awa. Well, we're not going to recruit you tonight, but we do want to tell you our story. We'd like to start with some music, Going Home, which is a familiar slow march, and a 3/4 retreat march called The Battle's Over. You've probably heard that before. I think it was used in the soundtrack of the Mel Gibson movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, about a terrific 3-day battle in Vietnam. So we'll give you the slow march and then the quick step. It's made you loud. You won't offend us if you have to cover your ears. apologize for the somber look on both of us, but you have to remember that we're trying to read the music in our heads. We're old. Well, when we first got asked to do this about a month or two ago, it was by the Red Hats. And we'd never done anything like this before. I'm talking with a couple of the ladies there, kind of find out that there were very few band members left in Grove City who had spanned most of the years that the band was in existence. We're two of them. Rick Reynolds is another that most of you know, but he lives in Sagertown now. And Rick has put his pipes away and retired them 2 or 3 times over the years, and again brought them out. But we felt like it was asking a lot to bring him cleared out from Sagertown, so it fell upon us. And when we got asked to do this, I didn't know really how to approach it. So I thought, well, if I were writing a newspaper article or a paper for school, you'd start with the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and why. And that's the way I kind of waded into this. So the who of this were the men and their families of Grove City, Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, and even West Virginia. And their families I include because that was a very important element in this group. It was a very family-oriented organization, as I'll talk about later. What? Well, the Grove City Highland Band. They were also known as the Kilties, the Pipes and Drums, and just the Pipe Band. Where? Grove City, Pennsylvania was its headquarters, and I'll get to that in a moment. When? 1948 to 1998, so it was 50 years, and at one time received a Pennsylvania Congressional Award for that. Why was a little bit harder to pin down. I relied heavily on these 2 books that George Kettler wrote, and they're printed for the first and the second 10-year period. So if you don't mind me reading a little bit, he was quite a whiz with a pen and had quite a sense of history, so I'll quote him from time to time. The area that we live in here resembles the border country of southwestern Scotland, down the Galway country, and the rolling hills which give way to flat plains, not too dissimilar from western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio. There are a lot of people of Scottish heritage that came to this area, either from Ontario or up from Pittsburgh. And they came here for many reasons, a lot of them economic. The steel mills later on, before that farming as my own ancestors did, and then later on the coal mines, from which type of work they were familiar with. So there was quite a smattering of Scots and Irish in this area, and you just open the phone book and you can see that the maps go on forever. The Pipe Band also gave rise to some other organizations, one of which was its Highland Dancers, the ladies that performed with the band over all its 50 years. Another group also started by George Kettler, known as the Royal Highland Scots Fusiliers Band. It's a long name which means brass military marching band. And they performed with us at a number of different occasions. There was also a Northwestern Pennsylvania Country Dance Society, which is the forerunner really of square dancing in this country, but a little bit more formal. And of course, some of you may remember the Pladettes and the Junior Pladettes. So the Scots ancestry had quite an influence in this area. Well, let's start at the beginning. You know, what brought this band to fruition? And I'm going to quote from page 5 of George Kettler's book. Do any of you remember the Dad's restaurants? Sure. Across the way? That was the birthplace, so to speak.
Sweet rolls.
Right?
Essentially, the Grove City Highland Band found its origin around a table in Dad's restaurant. Broad Street, Grove City. Winter had spread its mantle. Present that afternoon in early December 1948 were Bill McKay Jr., Jack Kennedy, Frank Schaefer, Ray Bryant, and George Kettler, all of Grove City. Each had a cup of coffee, discharge pins from various of the armed services, no money, unbounded faith, and a sense of the ridiculous. Just how it happened, we're not altogether sure now, but somewhere in the course of the conversation, the matter of bagpipes and drums came up. By the time the group broke up, it had been decided to form a pipe band about which none of those present knew anything. There is an exception to that statement. George Kettler was a captain in the Marines and he was stationed, among other places, in New Zealand. And it was there that he became trained a little bit on the bagpipes. He was aware of them, and he brought that interest back here to Grove City. So he's not giving himself credit here in that period. So that's how it started, just a meeting at Dad's Restaurant. I guess that's the way a lot of organizations get going. It led to an exploratory meeting at the old Armory building. And of course, things like, what's it gonna cost? Where do we get equipment? Can we get sponsors? Can we do fundraisers? I mean, all the things that go with putting an organization together today was no different in 1948. They found that a couple of men in town who had quite an interest in Scottish history, Dr. Morgan Barnes and Ray Bowie, would sponsor the band in the amount of $3,500. And in 1948, that was a huge sum of money. So those two men take a lot of credit for getting this thing on the street. The bagpipes individually were about $80 then, 80. Now they're $1,200 and up. The drums were from $70 to $150. Now they start at $700. Uniform for a complete kit was about $250 then. Now it's $1,200 and up. So you can see that the costs have risen with the times, but at no time was it ever cheap. Somebody has asked me from time to time why the band chose the tartan that it wore. And neither one of us are wearing that tonight. Those were band kilts that we turned back in. But it was a red and green plaid that's fairly common. You'll see a lot of bands wearing it. And the reason is it's a Stuart tartan. And there are 3 or 4 lines of the Stuart family. One of them is the Royal Stuart. But this line of Stuarts was from the Blair Athol region of Midlands, Scotland. And it was Stuart of Athol. That line had completely died out. So there was no involvement in getting permission to wear that tartan with this pipe band or the others that used it. That's why they chose it. It became the Grove City tartan over 50 years, and people still see that kilt. They ask about the pipe band. Another association began at this point in time with the Grove City National Bank across the street. I think it's now Citizens. The band went there to raise more money, and they were asked to sign a note. And I'm not sure if you went into a bank today and asked to sign a note, they'd know what you were talking about. But that's what they did. And basically it was a promissory note to pay back, and they borrowed $1,700, again, a large sum in those days. Every one of the prospective band members, and I think there were 17 initial people, signed that note. That became a tradition, if you will, a tradition of being in debt. Because every year after that, the band would pay off its debt based on the performances and the praise and monies that it brought in. And they go back to the bank, the first of the year, it was traditional, like Bill McKay went, and he took out another note. And so we're back in debt again. And it did 2 things. It gave them a sense of purpose, and it gave them a sense of cohesiveness that we're in this up to our necks if we don't make good on the bank note. So that tradition carried on for many, many years. They all signed the note. They got their uniforms. They practiced during the winter of 48 and 49. And then by Memorial Day in 1949, they felt ready. And George Johnstone was the first drum major, knew nothing about bagpipe music, but he and George Kettler studied. And they took the band out for Grove City's Memorial Day Parade, and that was their beginning. And I may add that it was an auspicious beginning, as they had a number of parades that year, during which they thought their performances were very good. But in August, they went to Detroit, which was the first of many infamous road trips. And they took part in the 100th anniversary of the St. Andrews Society, which was quite a thing, a national event. Well, you can imagine pipe bands of all caliber from all over Canada and the United States. They took part there in their first massed bands. And if any of you have ever been to the Highland Games and you've all experienced the massed bands, it's a ground-shaking, soul-numbing experience. And I wanted to read what George had to say about that. It's anywhere from 700 to 1,200 pipers and drummers all playing at once and marching. And he says, regarding that first one, the thrill of one's first mass band is a never-to-be-forgotten experience. When 30 pipe bands move out on a 5-beat roll and you are one of the mass, something happens to your mental reaction which defies description. The hackles rise in the back of your neck, chills chase each other up and down your spine, and your knees feel weak and uncertain. Then the pipe skirling cuts through to the marrow, and one feels like a giant. Nothing is impossible. The odds are too great, not too great to be overcome, and one feels it can march forever. And on and on. And you can see how it moved for this event. Well, that was the high point of the day because the bands were asked to march off individually. And Grove City, by this time of the day, had realized that they're out there with the likes of the 48th Regiment in Canada, the City of Toronto, maybe the Vancouver Police Pipe Band, all of which have been playing for years and were highly professional. So it was with some trepidation that they began a roll-off, and they went past the reviewing stand alone in front of all these other bands. And I think he made a mention of that too. Let's see if I can my notes there. It was a thrill to go the first mass band, as I relayed to you. The band on the right, the Canadian Legion Band, had competed earlier in the day and stepped off with 96 beats per minute. Today, the bands march at 86 beats per minute, which is a more comfortable walking pace. Smoothly entering the attack and playing a smart regimental march. At the halfway point, it suddenly quit. Grove City, rolling along, didn't get quite off to a good start, entered the attack in a sort of hit-or-miss fashion and fumbled along. The front rank played Barren Rocks of Aden. The rear rank, not catching the melody, finally switched to E, while a couple of reeds double-toned the entire distance. The field was interminably long, and finally crossing the goal line, the band sort of faded out and shuffled uncertainly into single file, eyes averted, and silently got into position for the final mass bands. One of the drummers, who had had the foresight to remain in the stands, and I think to this day it was Jack Kennedy, said it sounded rather like row, row, row your boat. And later on, Drum Major Gordon of the distinguished 48th Highlanders of Canada put it this way when he was talking to George Kettler about their performance. He said, "Well, New, you have two choices as I see it. You can go back home and start it again, or you can quit the New." But they didn't quit. They were beaten for the time being, but they didn't give it up. And they came back, kind of shook it off, and decided, you know, if we're going to do something, we're going to have to do it right and put a lot more into this. So they began to seek outside help. They began to recruit. They began to study and practice in earnest, and things began to happen for them. In the early 50s, they brought in new members. My dad was one of them, was a piper. My uncle Chuck Brunner was another piper from up toward Franklin. They added a lot in this time frame, and they began to play more, and they began to make engagements all over the country. They went to Chicago. Later on, we went to the Washington, D.C. Cherry Blossom Festival, another famous road trip or two. Toronto, Canada, down into North Carolina. The band went a lot of different places. And they had many mixed venues, from large cities to small towns. They began to have some success. They began to get recognition. They were riding that kind of a wave of good times there. And most of their performances were very well received, with one notable exception. And again, I'd like to quote from Skirling Pipes, George's second book. And it regards a little town by the name of Homer City. Have any of you been to Indiana? Well, many of the Grove City band members that I knew lived and died without ever really knowing that they'd been to Homer City and where it was. A whole chapter, and actually a paragraph is devoted. For another thing, 1954 was the year of Homer City. Famed in song and story, the one and only occasion on which the band made its appearance in that remote community. To quote from his earlier book, on July 30th, the band made one of its wildest trips in its career to Homer City. For years, the tradition in the band had been that only Jack Kennedy ever took time to find out the location. If he wasn't in a given car, the group went more or less by blind reckoning. And that was true. The result in anything that was as indefinite and indistinct as Homer City was a complete mystery to any other driver. No group ever went anywhere with less road information than the Grove City Highland Band. This was in the days before GPS, interstates, or any of that. You can imagine some of the roads that they took. It wasn't that the information was not available. Nobody would take the time to find out, trusting that someone else in the other car would know. On and on. The car would finally arrive, 2 minutes to get ready. It was a matter of deep concern to the band, but that's about as far as it went. Well, this Homer City was one such trip. Probably nobody yet knows exactly where it is or how he got there. At one point, the road simply disappeared. Cars careened across a large empty field. And I remember a story about Pat Patterson driving the new Buick up a cow path and complaining about the barbed wire scratching. My dad, Jim McCollough, and my Uncle Chuck Bruner were luckily riding together. And they were the first two to locate Homer City. They threw on some parts of their uniform, stuck the pipes together, and began piping down the street in a duet as the parade was underway, substitute for the entire band. As other members located Homer City, cars came screeching to a halt, parked illegally at curbstones, in front of service stations, police stations, etc. They hurriedly dressed, tuned their pipes, and fell in a sort of a mob formation. Pitiful remnants came swinging up the street. We finally ended up with a presentable band, George says, and taking advantage of a momentary halt, Pipe Major Kettler got the pipes tuned while the drums tightened their snares just in time to roll past the reviewing stand, which is where the judges were. The sponsor found the entire thing too much for him, slipped the check to Pipe Major, and hurried off to a cool bar somewhere. We never saw a more nervous and upset band and never did see him again. The band was not invited back to Homer City again, nor were any tears shed. So it didn't go well every single time. That's the story that remains in the band archives to this day. There began this groundswell of interest in things Scottish grew, not only in Grove City, but in Pennsylvania, Ohio. There were many Scots working in the steel industry, and many of our members drove every week from Youngstown and Hubbard and places like that to take part in the band. Also in Pittsburgh, there were more than one pipe band. Westinghouse had a band, Gulf Oil sponsored a band, and I think Chrysler Corporation had 2 bands. 2 or 3 from the South District down there, I can't even remember. And they used to have big things at Kennywood. But before Kennywood, it started right here in Grove City with the formation of the Tri-State Pipe Band Association in the early 50s. And I think I have some photos here for you. This is, Gary, if you would just pass that. That's the early band in 1951. This is Memorial Day in 1954. You can see that the ranks are growing. About that time, this Tri-State Association was formed with the purpose of advancing Scottish history and pipe band competition. It went on here at the college field, and there are photographs of many bands down in the old college field competing here, some from Cleveland, some from Pittsburgh, some from West Virginia, for 3 years. Then it was decided to move it to a location with higher population, because before interstates, this was still a hard area to reach. So they went to Berea, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland. I remember playing over there in competition in 1961. But later on it moved to Ligonier, and today the Ligonier Highland Games are very populous. I heard this year they had 20 pipe bands competing down there. But that all started right here in Grove City. We'd like to play a couple of 4/4 marches for you at this point. The first one is "We're Nawa to Biowa," which means we'll be away but not to stay, we'll be back. And the other is called "The Rowan Tree," which is known to us as the Northern Mountain Ash. So it's a popular tree in Scotland. They're both 4/4 marches. We won't be offended if you These are outdoor instruments. No. Tell the beats about 86 to the minute. It's a real easy cadence to carry you a long way. These were marching military bands. I'll keep that on a second. My dad started in the band in the early 50s, and they used to come up to Polk where he worked, the state hospital there, to perform in the Parents' Day Parade every September. And so as little kids, we got used to early the smell of sweaty wool uniforms and bagpipe seasoning and calfskin drum heads and the like. And there was an old Scot from town that many of you probably remember, Alec Morrison, who's also known as Scotty Morrison. And he had quite an early military history. As a young drummer boy, he ran away from home and joined one of the regiments in World War I. He worked at the Johnstone Foundry, one of the foundries here in town. Well, he was a likable chap, and he took right two little kids, including myself, heavy Scots brogue that I had to cut my way through. But I can remember, at about 5 or 6 years of age, he came up to the house along with the band after the parade, and he told me, he gave me the sticks, and he says, now, and I can't mimic the brogue. He says, you put the left stick in your hand like this, and you put the right hand in the right stick in the hand like this over the top. You'll see drummers today on TV beating like this. You can't do that with this type of drum. And he says, I want you to do this. I want you to go, mama, Dada. He says, do Mama Dada, Mama Dada. He says, I'll come back in a year and see how you're doing. So that eventually came into something like this. He'd probably be proud. He was the first original band members that we piped his funeral down in West Sunbury on a cold March day on a hillside. I was just a young boy and I remember it very well. Well, that brought us along. In 1954, they took part in another a gathering out in Chicago this time. And I'm going to pass this program, and you can see the level of competition has gone up amongst the bands, and Grove City itself is pictured on page 8 where the clip is. There's a clip also of the early days of the Tri-State Pipe Band Association. Some of them show other bands in the background. I don't know what that photo does. By 1958, they were recognized statewide. Their picture was listed on Borough Magazine. This is a Pennsylvania magazine. I think there's a copy of this here. If not, I think we can get you one. Great. That's quite a band. I was down here once with Dr. Armour. They had this, and I was just going over the names of all these men. And he said, "How do you know this guy?" I said, "I was there." So that brings us up to 1958. Kind of a unique year for me in that my dad took me to practice, band practice. In the fall of 1958, I was 11 years old. And I knew Alec Morrison, and in short order, he turned me over to Alec Williamson, who was a man from the Hubbard area, I believe, Niles. Old Scott, hardline. He was an excellent drummer, and he was the band's drum sergeant at that time. And he taught me the same way he'd been taught, by rote and by repetition over and over again. And it was a very serious undertaking, and I can remember carrying a pocket full of Band-Aids to practice because the sticks would wear blisters on your hands. That's how intense the practice was. And I'm sure it was the same for the pipers starting out. So I became under the tutelage of Alec Williamson. I was only 11 years old, not nearly big enough or strong enough to carry one of these, which weighs in excess of 20 pounds. So they got me a little wooden drum. I still have it. And it had snares, but it only weighed about 4 or 5 pounds. And in the spring of 1959, I had my first trade. But during the winter, when they determined that I was coming along and could represent the band all right without embarrassing them or myself, they took me over to Frank Schaefer's house. And Frank was the quartermaster for many, many, many years. And Frank had a unique way of cataloging things. I'll sum that up to say that everything was in a trunk. So we went to Frank's after practice one night, and he began to outfit me, pulling out doublets and Glengarry bonnets and sporrans and belts and slings and spats and hose tops and all the paraphernalia that goes with it. Just like a kid on Christmas, stuff flying out. And the only uniform that fit me, that had been turned back in, belonged to Jack Kennedy. And if you remember Jack Kennedy, he was a man of slight build, also a drummer. So that was my first uniform, and I got underway with his equipment. Regarding, I told you about the drum instruction, the pipe instruction George talks about here on page 34. And I'm just now starting, Laurence is teaching me the bagpipes after all these years. And but you can't learn it by osmosis, having spent all these years in the pipe band. It's difficult, and I can vouch for that. On page 34 of his book, he says, a new piper starting the long grind towards full playing status has a long road to hoe, and it's generally the minority that has the gumption to see the program through to its conclusion. Not only must a new member absorb an entirely new musical technique, but in many cases must learn music from the ground up. More often than not, that was the case. Rather than musicians that came to this band, they were just people interested in pipes and drums. That may have been an advantage, as they didn't have to unlearn anything else. Bagpipe score consists of only 9 notes, no sharps or flats, the lack of which is filled with a number of grace or extra notes, and therein lies the rub. 9 notes sounds pretty easy, but it's all the little grace notes, as Laurence can vouch for, and as he's trying to teach me. They're very fast little filler notes that have to be played over and over 1,000 times till you get the speed right and the correctness. They must be mastered to obtain the peculiar skirling sound of the pipe. In addition, to learn to hold a bag steady is like mastering an invention of the devil. There's a pipe tune called "Devil in the Kitchen." You can take what you will from that title. The bag, in essence, serves as a bellows, as a reserve of air. It must be filled continually during the rendition of a tune, and to coordinate one's blowing in the air, pumping the left arm, fingering the chanter is a myriad of exercises in grace notes and blowing. You have to keep step, watch the drum major, and listen for the change in the beat of the drum is a task which only the most obstinate can master. Most students get along well enough with a practice chanter, which is a lot like a recorder. There's the 9 notes in the blowpipe. But when one starts a bagpipe, the men are shortly divided from the mice. And that's right where I'm at.
You gonna play that?
Not after that yet.
I didn't see him bring his pipes in.
I'd like to give you a little aside at the moment on the technology. That bagpipe is an ancient instrument, and contrary to popular history, it really didn't begin in Scotland. It was brought there, as best as we can tell, by the Romans, who occupied Great Britain for several hundred years. And prior to the Romans, it came from the Middle East, from shepherds who played the pipe with their herds, and eventually someone got the idea to attach a bag to it, usually a goat skin or something, to hold more air. And that's how they sort of originated, but it was the Highlanders that put the drones on, the 3 drones that you see over the shoulder, to give it that deep, echoing, resonating sound that carries so far over the hills. The Irish pipes are very similar, but they only have 2 drones. And you'll see the Irish pipe bands without a tartan, usually they're in a solid color called a hodden gray or hodden yellow. But they're a little bit different. The technology then didn't change for thousands of years until the invention of a machinable plastic called Delrin. And that was in about the 1980s? Early 1980s.
My first practice chanter, I started to learn to play in '74. It was plastic,
Okay, so
but I don't think they applied it
to the pipes.
to the bagpipes themselves. They were just for the practice chanter.
Okay. Prior to that, they were all wood, and African blackwood was the only choice because of its denseness, the sound they got from it, and the fact that it was machinable. The bags, of course, were cowhide, elk hide, leather, and they had to be sealed with some obnoxious formulas, the likes of which are lost to history. Nowadays, you can get a Gore-Tex bag. Some other materials are used that allow the bag to breathe but yet still hold air. So technology has finally caught up with the bagpipes to a certain extent. The drumming, when I started in the band, the drums were old, either wood, shell, and covered with brass, and they were tensioned by rope. You push down on some keepers, similar to this, and it would tighten the rope and draw the head tight in the snare. Then they evolved into the screw type device that holds these together, but the heads were still calfskin. And if we played in a rain, Saxonburg comes to mind, the driving thunderstorm in the middle of July, the leather head would turn to mush. So you couldn't get any response from the sticks. They almost buried themselves in the head. And the only way we could avoid that, or to stay off the inevitable, was to rub lanolin in it of some sort. And that gave some waterproofing and some resistance to the drum head. Well, in the 1960s, about the same time as they began to use plastic in the chanters, they applied plastic technology to the drum heads. And it was in a laminated form. That was a great step forward, because the weather now was not a factor. And you could play through the entire parade in a snowstorm, which we have, or a heavy rain without any effect. The problem with the early plastic is the continual beating by the drumsticks wore it away, and the laminations began to let go. And it was not uncommon, right in the middle of a parade, zap, you're out of the drum. So technology advanced, and about the time I left Grove City for the service, 1969, they were just starting to transition away from the plastic heads, and I'll mention that a little bit later. 1959, like I said, was my first parade in Slippery Rock. It was also the longest parade in the history of the band, and that includes Washington, D.C. When we went to Titusville for the history of 100 years of oil up there, 1959. It's hard for me to believe that that was 50 years ago, because they're celebrating 150 years of oil this year. And that parade lasted over 4 hours, and I was 12 years old, luckily with my little drum. It was quite lengthy, and it was one of the longest engagements that year. We did 25 parades in 1959. And I began to get a sense of what I was involved in here. I realized that I'd been taken into an organization of men from all backgrounds and accomplishments. There were men like George Kettler, captain of Marines, Dr. Liggett, professor at the college, and a chaplain with the combined Canadian and American regiment, the Devil's Brigade, which has been reported in print and in movies. Navy veterans like Frank Schaefer and Bill McKay, men like Bob Offit, who was a combat engineer, carried a BAR in the Battle of the Bulge, and Alec Morrison and Dave McCollough, who had enlisted as boy drummers in World War I. These men expected of me deportment, dedication, and discipline, all for the rewards of the thrill of marching with a pipe band, wearing a cumbersome, heavy wool uniform, carrying a heavy instrument in all kinds of weather. It was heady stuff for a 12-year-old kid. You began to sense you were part of something greater than the sum of its parts, something with traditions. It had an esprit de corps, which I couldn't even pronounce back then. But it's my thinking in this day that that esprit de corps, that sense of tradition, that sense of belonging to something greater, was what kept this band alive for 50 years. And it's what these men missed when they left the service, and what they found in this pipe band. The band began taking itself seriously. In '61, they entered competition at Berea. In the early 1960s also, George Kettler untiringly started another band, the Royal Scots Fusiliers that I mentioned earlier. He recruited many of these bandsmen from the college professors up here who had played musical instruments. And the two bands complemented each other. If you've ever been down to the Civic Arena and seen the Black Watch or the Scots Guards and those performances, we did a similar thing. And as George retired from the pipe band, that is from the pipe major's position, he never did leave the pipe band at that time, he elected a man by the name of Harold Reed from Pardo. And Harold brought to the band not only the same energy that George had, but a sense of history and a sense of the future where this band could go. He also had a very dedicated wife who supported him unbelievably through all the years that they gave of themselves for this band. They attended seminars in Canada almost every weekend. She was a Highland dance instructor. He was a pipe major and responsible for teaching the men in the piping. They brought down experts, if you will, people who had played in Shotts and Dykehead, the world champion pipe bands in Scotland. Duncan McCollough was the man I'm thinking of, and he became a great friend of the Grove City Highland Band and a great supporter. Alec Robertson, also from Ontario, who was pipe major of the Argyll and Sutherland Regiment. That's the kind of people that Harold and his wife got us involved with and intertwined with, and our level of expertise began to really grow. And it was after this next step forward that all these four groups, the Fusiliers, the Country Dance Society, the Pipe Band, the Argyll Broadswords, and a number of others, began to put on performances at the college. Forgot that one, it's 1961. And these performances were listed as very similar to the ones in Pittsburgh, and I have a couple of posters here. They were called tattoos, which is a military term. It's a mixed military concert, if you will. And these were very highly attended, not just from the local area, but buses from Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Youngstown, and other places, of people with Scottish heritage that were interested in this type of thing came to see these performances. And they were done at the Civic Arena, up at the college. They were choreographed. The lighting was done expertly by the staff up there, and we had a couple of semi-professional MCs to carry the program through. They were Helen Crow remembers performing with the Country Dance Society up there, and she'll back me up on the level of professionalism, if you will, that these programs put on. They were, however, a lot of work. It took a lot of extra practice. And after 3 or 4 of these, and we did them, tried to do them every other year to give ourselves a break, I think '69 was the last one that the bands did. Quite laborious. Well, they were also traveling. You have to remember, in addition to this 12 to 30 parades and performances a year, from Washington, D.C. to Toronto, mixed venues from places like Volant, the Stoneboro Fair, Clarion, the Autumn Leaf Festival, all the way down to Heinz Hall in Pittsburgh, and just about everywhere in between. I mean, it's impossible to list the number of places this band performed, nor even to estimate the number of people that it entertained over the years. In 1960, we also had another surge of new members. It was kind of a recruiting drive. There was a pipe band in Oil City that had decided to fold its wings, and we got 4 members from Oil City who were very good performers with us. 1968 was the 20th anniversary. The band decided, let's do something about it. So they thought 3 days isn't too long. They rented the Pengrove Hotel. They performed at the college. They performed at the park. They had a reunion of all the old members and a big dinner at the Pengrove, and it was promoted in the local newspapers. It was quite a celebration down there. After 1968, things began to change, at least for me, and this is a good point to stop and give you another tune. This is called the Kilworth Hills, and I think it was written by a homesick soldier.
I'll need a moment here.
Okay.
I made an adjustment now, but I hope it's a good one.
Even though they're modernized, the pipes, the reeds still react to temperature and humidity constantly, so that's why it is. Bill, I forgot to mention mention, the new drum heads are made of Kevlar, the bulletproof material. You set it and forget it, unlike the bagpipes. 3, 4? 4.
It only bothers you, it
Okay.
doesn't bother
All
me.
right,
Know the tune.
okay.
Weather rules. Quick.
Graduated from Grove City College. The war was raging heavily in Vietnam. I went into the Air Force in August. But before I did, came a surprise in the form of a dinner at the Pen Grove. Pen Grove, over the years, was traditionally where we held our Christmas dinner, which was a banquet. That any excess funds that we had left over from uniform expenses were devoted to a big, very formal dinner there. I think Mrs. Howard can vouch for you that they were nice occasions, very nice dinners.
Oh, yes, always.
My dad told me that we were going to a surprise party summer evening, and I thought it was a private party. We did a few of those over the years. The fellow down in Knox that had the big barn, we did things like that. Occasionally we'd get asked to play at the country club. So he was pretty shady about the details. We suited up and he and I drove down to the Pen Grove. And we got in there and the whole band was arranged around a table to which I was seated at the head. And it turned out it was kind of a farewell party for me because I was leaving for the service, and I was needless to say, overwhelmed. They left me this letter on the Grove City stationery, which I still have and is one of my most treasured documents. And it welcomes me. It says, "The gathering tonight of your fellow bandsmen is for a very special purpose. For over a decade, you have given to this band unselfishly of your time, your talent, and your guidance. We have given to you the responsibility of a very serious and demanding post, which you have served, we feel, to the best of your ability and always in excess of our expectations. Tonight, we wish to humbly and with grateful appreciation say thank you for all that you have given to us, and to extend to you our very best wishes for excess and happiness in all of your future endeavors. Please join us and allow us to honor you. And it's signed by all the band members, with another letter from the pipe major on the back. In addition to that, they presented me with this pewter tankard, which has my name and my rank engraved on it. And on the back is a line from a famous Scottish hymn. May also be a quote from Robert Burns, and it says, "Better loved you cannot be, will you know come back again." I present that basically as a reflection of what this organization was. The heart and soul of it was not just music. So I went away, and I was gone for 10 or 11 years in the service, and I lost contact with a lot of the band members, but I remember that so strong was the pull of this organization that one Christmas night, near Christmas, I flew home from Germany all night, landed in New Jersey, and then drove all day to make the band dinner that night. And tried to get back as often as I could. A lot of men came into the band in that time frame that I didn't meet till later on. Some great pipers like Laurence Bubeck, drummer John McCoy, piper Kirk McClure, Carl Karekis and Bruce Long of the Greenville area, and another family which had started and continued a long tradition with the pipe band were the Barbers from Hendersonville, Stoneboro area. Many times there were 5 barbers on the street in the band, a father and 4 sons, split equally between the pipes and the drums. So a good many men joined in the 80s, and the band continued on in a healthy way. In 1981, after a send-off like that, I had to come back. So I found myself living in Western Pennsylvania, tentatively came back to see what was going on, and found that it was still a large band. Most of the traditions were still intact. I did find some changes going on. One of them I've talked about, the technology of the drums had changed. The sticks had gone from these lightweight speedsters of the plastic age to a heavier stick which had to be used to get response from the Kevlar heads. And the drums had changed. In addition to the tension on the heads, they had to rebuild the drums because the heads were so strong that to tighten would actually collapse the drum on itself. So there were a lot of changes taking place in there, and I almost felt like Rip Van Winkle, waking up from the hills and coming back and thought, whoa, this is all changed. The drumming had changed too. It had become much more complex, and it was a little more difficult to keep up. But again, Harold Reed brought down people from Canada, people like Ken Eller of the Ontario Pipe Band, and his drummers, 2 of which gave us really good instruction, seminars, even wrote competition music for us, the likes of which is very difficult to find in this country. So the band kept rising to higher and higher technical levels. There was, however, a wind of change blowing, and that was with post-Vietnam in the United States, began to be less and less interest, and if you will, even abstinence from anything related to the military. This pipe band was founded on the traditions of a military regimental band. And not just the Grove City Band, but everywhere we went to compete, you'd see more often than not very casual wear. The doublets went away, the feather bonnets, which were ostrich feathers, by the way. The military sporrans, which were made of horsehair, the spats, which covered the hose tops, all those were military items. And you began to see that fading away with open collars, casual shirts, sunglasses. It was all just a change of venue, and I sensed that. And there were those of us still in the band, old timers if you will by now, who were a little bit resistant to that change. And we tried to hang on to the traditions, but things change. You know, change is constant. And the band adopted a middle-of-the-road technique with relationship to the uniform, but the music began to get more and more complex because now they were competing. They weren't really interested in pleasing a crowd on the street. They didn't necessarily pick the most melodious tunes or the most familiar tunes. They picked tunes that were highly complex and were designed to show off to the judges their level of expertise. The drumming followed the very same route. Well, that raised the level of playing in the band. It sounded great. We had what someone in Canada called the big band sound, and they weren't talking about Glenn Miller. The chanters were all bought in to be matched. Before that, each man bought his own set of pipes. The chanters oftentimes didn't match in pitch. So that was happening in the 80s as I came back. Pipe Major Harold Reed retired and went to Florida. David Thompson, who was his replacement, worked very hard to improve the level of competition in the band and the level of playing. They began winning. At Ligonier, in Canada, in Jamestown, a number of places. And some of the other bands began to sit up and take notice. But people in Voland, in Clarion, in Franklin, I mentioned Franklin because I have a picture here of the band in front of the courthouse in the early 80s. They began to ask, like yourselves, where's the band? Why don't we see the Grove City Highland Band? Why don't we hear practice on Thursday nights anymore? Well, it was just the evolution of the organization. I can't really say that it was good or bad. It's just how things evolved in this band and other ones. In 1992, I had an extensive work schedule which kept me out of state about 17 days a month. And I couldn't keep up with the rigors of the competition level. I mean, the drum scores, for example, were extremely complex, and they required a lot of hard work. You've got 6 drummers or 5 drummers all playing, and it has to sound as one. Pipe section the same way. Continued to do well in competition, but again, they lost the sense of the tradition of where they'd come from. And they lost that sense of family that I had mentioned way back at the start. Family was very important in this band, and no matter where they went, the families went along with them, the wives and the kids. We made a cookout or a dinner out. It was just part of the organization. When it came down to competing, it was like a job. You work, and you go to competition, everybody drive there, and everybody just disperse afterwards. It was like work, and the family sort of got left out. So they moved away from their early traditions. In 1998, we had one last go at it, and the town of Grove City was holding a bicentennial parade. And they asked around about the pipe band, where it was, and if they would perform. The band was still intact in 1998, but that very day, they were up in New England.
I don't know where the competition was, but they definitely were not available for the parade here in Grove City.
So the mayor asked Laurence about it, and he was persistent. And Laurence is persistent too. He asked him, can you feel the pipe band?
What he asked me to do was, can you see what you can do about it? With the Grove City Band not coming to Grove City. And I said, Mayor, I don't belong to the band anymore. If they've got an engagement, there's nobody that can talk about it. Well, he says, well, can you do something? I said, I don't know, Mayor.
Is the mayor
I
your
don't know.
father?
No, Dad, the mayor at the time was Marvin Baker.
Okay, that's right.
And he cornered me right across the street here in Strawberry Days before they built that dormitory. And he said, can you do anything? I said, Mayor, I don't know, I'll try. You know, that's in what, May? And I think the parade was in August.
August 1st, yeah.
So there wasn't much time, but I was able. I knew who had quit the band, and I knew where they lived. So I started making phone calls, and fortunately for me, I made some pretty good friends in that band, They knew they could trust what I said every time. And I coaxed them down to Grove City, and at that time I was still on the fire department. And we met up on Pine Street, and I opened the doors, pulled a truck out, and we practiced, and practiced, and practiced. I think we were to have 5 pipers, 2 snares,
The bass.
a tenor, and a bass. As it turned out, we marched with 4 pipers, 2 snares, a tenor, and a bass. And that was the longest parade I ever remember. We started at Highland Avenue by the school, marched up Poplar, crossed Main Street at Stewart, past Bilo, then the VFW, over to Broad Street, and down Broad Street the wrong way to the diner. I've never been in a parade where there were so many spectators along the way. By the time we hit Spring, from Highland Avenue, by the time we hit Spring, there were people both sides of the street standing 3 deep. And we piped and drummed all that way. When we finished, I was spent. I don't believe I could have played another tune if somebody had offered me $1,000.
There was no way with that crowd to take a break. With a big band and Bill McKay out front with a mace stick, he knew to give us a rest, and he'd find areas where the crowd would be sparse, and he'd give us a breather, walk a little way, and then he'd see as the crowd would swell, he'd call a tune, and he'd set up. But Laurence is correct, we had no break in that from start to finish. A couple here more I wanted to send around too. Thanks, Gary. This was a competition that we won down at Ligonier. Also, that's Merle's brother, late brother Merle. Lawrence's late brother Merle is a drum major leading the band off Ligonier. We won first place in 1988. Oh, let's see. We had a little party afterwards, but beforehand, Lawrence did all this on his own. He organized this whole thing. He made the phone calls. You couldn't say no. He arranged the fire hall for a practice. He connived the drums from somewhere. We couldn't get anything from the band as it existed. And the last thing they wanted to hear was that we call ourselves the Grove City Highland Band. So we kicked around and we contacted old-time member Rick Reynolds, who has a keen sense of history. And he thought for a moment on the phone, and he says, well, Patch, he says, why don't you call yourselves the Old Guard? And so we did. We had a sign made up to that effect for the bass drum, and I believe that there was a front page article in the Allied News that week. And I think I was quoted as saying my first parade in Grove City was in 1959, and I was there in 88, 49 years later, and it was a good way to wind up a career. We'd like to play for you this time a couple more popular numbers that you know, Amazing Grace and Scotland the Great, which really isn't the national anthem of Scotland, but everybody sings it anyway. I believe it's the tune we don't like to play, Scots Way Out. After 98, there isn't much to add. I'd just like to read one more quote from George's book, paraphrase him in Skirling Pipes. He talks about the sound. And some of you will go home tonight and you'll hear the pipes, you'll hear the chanter, and you'll hear the drums. We often found that that was the case. Going to a competition which lasts all day, and there's always a band playing, there's always a piper tuning up, there's dancers competing, and that piping sound is embedded. And it will take you hours after you get home, maybe into the next day before it leaves your consciousness. And George remarked about that and took it one step further. He said, and he's talking about Memorial Day 1968. I think this could equally be applied to the bicentennial parade. I forgot to show you our award for that, 50 years, the Grove City Highland Band. 50 years later. So I'll just interject here. There was something special about this parade. Perhaps it was the memory of 13 white-shirted pipers, and drummers who first carried the Grove City tartan into action 20 years before, or 50, as it will. Perhaps it was the sound of 17 pipes skirling out in full volume, with impeccable drums coming on behind. Perhaps it was old soldier McKay, up front there with the eagle mace, slightly dented and battered, now sending its signals down the line. Perhaps it was that something unique that happens when keening pipes and thundering drums conjure something up out of the past. A wild Highlander with his broadsword and targ, the Camerons of Waterloo, the war cry of a McGregor. Most probably it's an old veteran's emotion. 1,000 memories of kilts and tartans, hot avenues, rainy skies, or snow underfoot. The unison of 20 voices singing Tipperary or Pack Up Your Troubles, and the never-ending echo of pipes in his ears for lo these 50 years. That sound, how can one describe it? A sound that never entirely dies away, embedded somehow permanently in one's personality. It's all mixed up with hopes and fears and aspirations, with joyous occasions and those of extreme solemnity, like the time an old bandsman was laid to rest while the pipes lamented in deep loneliness over a hill. Not everyone can hear that sound, for there's no noise to it. You must have been there to understand it. This deep sense of spirit and courage and tradition that lingers there in the call of pipes, the old stories it tells, and the land of bends and glens and rushing torrents it describes. Unless one has been there, he will never understand it. For it beggars description. The band can march by in full splendor, pass on, fade away into the distance, into nothingness. But the bystander who has that understanding still hears it, feels it, and senses it. To him, the sound can never die away. I couldn't have said it better. Pipe Sergeant Bubeck will close our program with The Dark Isle. regarding the uniform or the instruments or any general question? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the Irish not wearing a tartan,
Yes.
and I wondered if there was ever a period in Scotland's history when the tartan was forbidden.
Yes. 1745 and 46. I meant to show you his black knife. I've forgotten my name. It's the personal knife carried in the right sock. It's skin dude is the best I can come to the Gaelic word. It's translated as a black knife. After the Scots were finally defeated in the Battle of Culloden in 1745 or 6, I forget. The British had it with these barbarians up north, and they occupied the country severely. It was atrocious. Anybody that had been engaged in the battles was, if not killed, and their families, they were shipped out to all points and parts of the world to be forgotten. And many of them came to the States, some to Australia, New Zealand, West Indies. Quite a few ended up in the Carolinas. But one of the edicts that the British enforced was that the kilt would not be worn, the pipes were forbidden to be played as an instrument of war. The dirk, which is a short sword, dagger if you will, was not allowed to be carried, nor the claymore, which is the basket-hilted sword that you see in the Rob Roy movies. It has a little woven basket to protect the hand. So the only weapon that the British allowed them, the English allowed them, was the black knife for personal protection. And a lot of these claymores, and even the bagpipes too, ended up under the thatching and roofs all over Scotland. And today, during remodeling and the tearing down of some of these old hundreds of year old huts, when the roofs are torn off, they'll find a rusty claymore up there as put aside as a day against which they might rise up and take their independence back from the English. So that was that went on for so many years before the kilt was allowed.
Didn't Queen Victoria bring the kilt back?
Yes, yes she did. Sir, you had a question?
Why was the Highland Band terminated?
Well,
You said that was in 1998?
1998 was its last year. Laurence and I were out of it at that time, and we weren't really sure of the reasons. But I know from talking to people that the competition was intense, and you can imagine other bands playing at upper levels wanting to steal, just like the pros in the football. They're trying to steal the best people. Our drum section, as I recall, was sort of spirited away to a Cleveland band. A number of the pipers ended up with, I think, Allegheny District in Pittsburgh, and several have now emerged with a Meadville band. So the band lost its sense of unity, of belonging to Grove City, and they went their ways to better themselves on competition level. There's 4 grades, and they were trying to work their way up.
Well, that's a shame for Grove City.
It really is, because the town never gave it much thought, but the band carried the name of Grove City all over the eastern United States and Canada for many, many years. And it's still well remembered. I don't know how many people we run into from time to time, even in Canada, that still ask us about the pipe. Other questions regarding the uniform?
Where's the farthest away you performed?
I'd say Chicago, probably Washington.
I wasn't in the band
Yeah.
at the time of Chicago.
Those were typically bus trips, overnight trips. Someone in the band, may have been Ray Bryant, I think, had a bus company. And we would charter buses to go to those things. The Washington parades, the Cherry Blossom festivals, those were family affairs. Families would go down and stay in the Arlington Hotel, I believe, down there, and
Fergus, Ontario, Canada was it?
Fergus, competition up there, and Kitchener, St. Catharines, other places up there. One of the best pipers that ever came through this band was Helen's brother, Bob Hamilton. And he learned to play, I think in our band.
Great.
But when he left Grove City, he ended up in the United States Air Force and played in the Air Force pipe band for many, many years, and then came back to this area and taught piping at the McDonald Band in southeast Pittsburgh region. I don't know how many people he trained over the years, but he was.
They're still going strong, and they're very proud
Yeah.
about who trained them.
Marty, you got a question?
I just wondered if the different hat styles, the feathered, fluffy ones, did that denote rank, or what's the difference between?
Good question, Marty. They don't with our band, but the drummers normally wore those bonnets, the feather bonnets. And I think those were a carryover from the Victorian era when the British fighting units wanted to present themselves as fearsome. So the bonnets on the soldiers made them look taller, bigger. If you see the old pictures of the Black Watch here in the United States, even during the French and Indian Wars, they wore not quite the feather bonnet, but it was a bearskin.
About half the size.
About half the height, yes. So
About
that,
half the height.
that thing was difficult to maneuver in the wind.
Well, I just wondered what in the world the
In
difference.
the rain, the dye came off the ostrich feathers and streaked your cheek. There were all sorts of memories about that. But to take your question one step further, Lawrence's Glengarry here is what they call, that's the tail.
That's so pretty.
The tail of a bird in Scotland called the black cock. And that's the real thing. It grew like that. It became forbidden in our time to take those birds for their tails. So what evolved during the 60s and 70s were, I think, turkey feathers that were steamed to have that curl in it. But he has one of the originals, and my dad's is an original.
That's
And they're
really something.
sort of like ivory in this day and age. You can't get them.
What about is it a leopard?
The leopard skin, yeah.
Yeah.
And Marty, your question, those feathers were typically worn by the clan chieftain.
That's
Way
what I
back,
wondered.
way back. So he was the one with the feather. The leopard skin was part of the drummer's apron. The non-dress version of that was white canvas. And it was basically an apron that he wore to protect his tunic from the wear of the drum, the bass drum, rubbing up and down. I'm not really sure how they get started with the leopard skin, but you gotta remember the British were stationed all over the world. And these Scottish regiments picked up what they could and what fitted. So the tiger or the leopard probably came from Africa or India. In the United States, the sporrans that we wear, originally in Scotland they were badger, and then later became horsehair. But in the United States, they couldn't find many badgers, but they did find raccoons. So a lot of the Black Watch, the early Black Watch, the sporran, which is nothing more than a pocket for your wallet and your keys and your ammunition or whatever, it was made of raccoon. And the band had those for a while. We had a number of raccoon sporrans still in the band. They're sort of collector's items today, but they're still there. There are no pockets. The kilt itself is made of 40-ounce wool. It's very heavy. And they're pleated in the back, all hand-stitched and pleated. And they're pleated to two different patterns. And Lawrence, I have him turn around and show you the back. This is McPherson.
Wow.
McPherson, pardon me?
McPherson.
Patterson, pardon me. And you'll note that all you see in the back are the white stripes instead of the tartan. That's called pleating to the stripe, and that's a military kilt. Mine is a family tartan. It's McCollough, and it's the same in the back as it is in the front. It's pleated so that the pattern repeats itself all the way around, and that's called pleated to the set, S-E-T-T, set being a tartan. So you see a striped kilt in the back, you know it's a military band.
What's the name of your tartan, Lawrence?
This is McPherson.
McPherson.
Not McPherson, McPherson. I took a beating last Sunday morning, right over here in front of the Tower Church. An old Scottish lady come off of the bus. We had friends here visiting from Barrie, Ontario, a whole busload. And I was asked to pipe them into church. Well, I just happened to be standing out on the sidewalk, warming up when the bus made the turn over here at the American Legion. And I thought, well, the jig's up. So I just kept playing, and I piped them off of the bus, and this old Scottish lady come up to me and she said, what tartan? I said, McPherson. She said, no, it's not McPherson, it's McPherson. I said, there may just be a little wee bit too much US in me. She said, they're the same in Canada. They don't know how to pronounce it. I thought, well, I'll get it right from there on.
Now, the two pins that are on, what are those on both of yours?
They're kilt pins.
Kilt pins? Okay.
I think originally they were to hold the flap down,
Uh-huh.
but they become decorative. And you'll see ones like Lawrence's with, is it Coast Guard?
Yeah, that's United States Coast Guard, and so is the belt buckle.
This one's kind of a traditional grouse claw, it's a Scottish grouse. The band, the military bands, and we finally adopted it after many years, is a giant sized safety pin. That's pretty traditional with the military bands.
If I may rise for just a moment.
I was going to introduce you.
Okay, I'm Gary Beck, old Grove City boy.
Yep.
Yep. Pat, I remember when he was like 12 years old, practicing over at Bowie's garage.
Yeah.
Yep. This is the Black Watch tartan, and I have a Celtic cross on mine. I'm the chaplain of the band I play in, and that's made of Connemore marble. And we're down to about 5 or 6 in our band. We're a family band. But we were up to about 14 or 15. And
You were the last I saw you.
yes. But we had a little defection, if you know what that means. Okay, and we're recruiting now, and we've got some wonderful young kids that are learning.
And where is your band located?
The Brigadoon Highlanders in Newcastle.
Were you at the games and Legionnaires?
I didn't make it this year, but I was in the mass bands last year.
You can mark your calendars the week after Labor Day. That's the Legionnaire Highland Games every year, they're the same time. I'll see you get it.
Gary, thank you for coming.
Well,
And
thank
Patch and Lawrence, this was great. This is truly Grove City history. And Lawrence, I have to tell you, I was looking at one of the pictures, and your son Marcy looks just like you looked back then. I could pick you out based on knowing Lawrence. I had his children in preschool many, many years ago. All right, we thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a treasure.
Very good, very good.
We have Brendan Higgins.
She doesn't tell me. She still thinks she's
It makes our lives.
Do you want to look at it? Is that off? I don't want to stand up in front of it.
Well, it's not as good as she has.
Yeah, I've seen her in a different car.
Yeah, that was concept. And
You stay up there, well, I guess that many years,
She was my teacher, and I had her as my critic teacher, but I didn't know what she lost her Joanne, lost her and I wasn't yes, I did. Sam, and Elsie.
I did too.
Sitting down close to the grandkids and it's all was nice and hot. Well, that's it's way all the way through here. I ended up teaching at Grove City for 24 years. Graduated. And we did teach 92. The McCollough girls, and the Hershey boys.
I think it's look.
This is one Michelle so very
Oh, Frank.
Oh, my.
I guess I do something see, it's just
You have still some of your outfits?
And the Yoli.
Yes.
I have none more.
Well, once you start concentrating on what you're doing, you want to find out.
Yeah. Well, I remember Scotty Morris. Oh, sure, I'm sorry. Scotty Morrison drove about a 1950 Buick Buick Suburban.
Catholic, wherever we go, whatever country, it's always the same thing.
Yeah.
It may speak differently, but it's the same. Well, it was really an interesting program. I enjoyed it a lot.
Did you film all that, or? Now, what is your name?
How many years did he play?
Mr. Armour. The Marcia's.
Marcia's father. Marcia's father.
Where was he?
Marcia's my neighbor now. I live up on Main Street.
I see.
I thought you were. And I chat with her every once in a while. She was a very good friend of my daughter in high school, Amber McCollough.
Oh, all right.
Remember Amber?
He said, you better work harder on that. Remember Roger and I saw a picture of it there. I'm sure there's a picture of it. I'll find it. Yeah,
They expressed an interest.
yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
last 6 months of that.
Yeah, right.
You look at that list of original members, three or four, I didn't know that.
Who's their hearing?
I still have my African Blackwood R.G. Hardy janner.
I used to have.
Wow.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, yes, well, I've seen a picture of that.